Grazie. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'll have to speak in English. So great pleasure to be here. I didn't understand what was going on before, but it felt very fun. So anyway, I enjoyed it. What I'll do today. I want to share with you some of the work we're doing both at MIT Senseable City Lab in our design office, looking at cities. Now, and I wanted to start with this picture. In the 1990s, people thought the digital world would actually make our lives increasingly virtual. So much so that many people at the time thought that physical space would matter less and less. That actually cities themselves would kind of one day disappear. This is Gilder in 1995, writing, "We are headed for the death of cities. Cities are leftover baggage from the industrial era." Well, what does this tell you? The first thing it tells you is never make predictions about the future, because no prediction could have been more wrong than this one. We know the cities have been thriving over the past few decades. That's a picture of Tianjin in China. China this century might build more urban fabric than all of humanity ever built. We know that since 2008, half of the world's population lives in cities, and this number could actually swell to 5 billion by 2030. So what has happened is that digital hasn't really killed our need for physical space. And I think today's gathering is also, also says the same thing about our willingness to really come together, to exchange ideas, to enjoy each other's company. But at the same time, it's transforming the way we use space. So digital and physical are kind of recombining and creating a new hybrid dimension. That's a dimension that some people call a smart city. We like to call it more like sensible city. We think the ultimate goal of all of this should be about people and about how we live in urban areas. But still, that's the process going on. It's about internet becoming Internet of Things, entering physical space and changing many things in the way we can run our cities. So this is what we're looking at with different operations as was mentioned, in the United States, in Europe, in Singapore. And I wanted to start with one of the oldest projects we did. In this project, it was back in 2006. So it's one of the first projects we did at the lab. It was at the Venice Biennale. You can see here a picture of our pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And what we did there for the first time, we actually managed to try to get real-time data from the city, a lot of real-time data from the city, and share it publicly with citizens. So the idea we can collect a lot of information, for instance, from the cell phone network in the city, a lot of information from the taxi network and so on, and then use this information to better understand what is going on. And this was actually the first time this was done, especially when you look at the data from the cell phone network. You can see here you had all the data from Rome being collected, sent to MIT, where it was analyzed, and then sent to the Venice Biennale in Venice, where it was shared with people. And I'll show you now just one example of how we use, for the first time ever that year, data from the cell phone network to understand the pulse of the city. And I'll show you a very specific moment here. It's actually the final of the soccer World Cup. That was 2006. Actually, Italy and France were playing in the final. And look at what happened in the city of Rome during the final by looking at information on the network. So here you see Rome. You see the river, the Colosseum. It's before the match. You see people going here and there, moving in the city. It's the early afternoon, as you see up there. And then the match begins, silence. Nobody talks anymore. And then Italy scores, France scores, halftime. People make a quick call and go to the bathroom. End of normal time, first overtime, the second overtime. There was a famous headbutt by Zidane. And finally, Italy wins. And then you see everybody going to celebrate in the center. Then the next morning, again, everybody goes to the center to meet the winning team and the prime minister. By the end of the day, everybody moves down here to a place called Circo Massimo. It's a place where, since Roman times, people go and celebrate. So you see a big peak by the end of the day over there. But the bottom line is that today, really, we can have a lot of real-time information from the city. This, for instance, is Lisbon. It's a visualization of Lisbon that was in MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, done by Pedro Cruz from our lab at MIT. And when you look at this, this is actually Lisbon mapped using billions and billions of data points collected from all the taxis moving in the city. Then if you got this data, you can analyze it. So that's the same data in New York. Taxis pick up and drop off. Every dot is somebody picked by a taxi, and every yellow dot and every blue dot is somebody getting off a taxi. Now, what you see here is JFK Airport in New York, and then if you zoom out, JFK was over here, and then you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. Then you can ask yourself, these days we like to share many things. We like to share apartments on Airbnb, couches, on couch surfing platforms. What if you were to share mobility more? And if you look at 2 points, between those 2 points in Manhattan, you actually have hundreds of thousands of trips connecting those 2 points in the course of the year. So potentially, we could share a lot of those trips between people. If you want to look at this with data, then you need to analyze this kind of huge volume of data you have from all the taxis in New York. Sometimes we say that big data needs big maths, big mathematics. You need new mathematical approaches to understand what is going on. So this is the paper we did by analyzing this using network science. And you see here this what we call shareability network that tell you how many trips could be shared through those networks that densify. And what you find is quite interesting that in New York, you could take everybody to destination when they need to be there, but with 40% less vehicles than what you have today. So again, you can take people to destination if we are ready to share, we can get to destination exactly when we need to be there, give or take a couple of minutes, but with much less infrastructure. Now, I'll tell you 2 interesting things that happened. The paper is from last year, but the first results came out before and actually came to the attention of Uber. And since then, we started a big collaboration with Uber. And as you might know, Uber Pool does exactly that. Uber Pool allows 2 trips to be combined, so 2 people going more or less in the same direction to share the same car. And every time you share a car, it means you've got 1 less car on the road, which means less congestion, less pollution, and ultimately a better quality of life in the city. I'll tell you something else that's interesting is that when the paper then came out, the New York Times did an article on it and said, okay, this is an interesting result, but nobody in New York, no New Yorker would want to share anything else with any other New Yorker, let alone a car. Well, it turns out that Uber Pool shows the opposite. It shows us now, for instance, in San Francisco, over 50% of all trips by Uber are done by Uber Pool. So people sharing the vehicle with somebody else. So there's just one example to see how if we are ready to share more, we can change a lot of dynamics in the city, in this case about mobility dynamics. And the other thing I wanted to mention to you is that people have been talking about carpooling for a long time. There were many experiments all the way in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and most of those experiments failed. But today, for the first time, the same thing is working. Again, Uber Pool is one example, but there's many other examples, or in Europe, on the longer distance, you've got BlaBlaCar. So why the reason is that is working is because you got real-time information in your pocket. And you can also trust the other people. You know who the other people are, you know where they are, you know if they have availability in real time, and that is what has become a game changer. So what wasn't possible before has become possible with digital. So the old idea of sharing more that, that we've tried for a long time, at least, at the end of the 20th century, now has finally become possible thanks to information. I want to share with you also some work that we just published a couple of weeks ago. It's about, looking, we've seen that this works in New York, but then we started asking, what about other cities? And so we kind of find some universal laws of shareability. If you look at this on our website, you will see, most of the cities on the planet and estimated how shareable they could become. By actually looking at these parameters that tell you how many trips can be combined in the city in the course of the day. Another thing I want to share with you is also what is happening not only with sharing the trip, sharing the ride, but also with potentially sharing the vehicle. We usually separate between ride sharing, means riding together, to car sharing, which is getting a vehicle one at a time, but one person and then another person. And the reason is that the vehicle itself is becoming much more intelligent. That's a map of some work we are doing where we're looking at the thousands of sensors inside the vehicle that tell you everything about it. And then you add this information with the sensor you see there at the top, which is a LiDAR scanner. It makes a three-dimensional scan of the city like this. That's actually a Google car using a Fiat Chrysler Pacifica van. And you get a three-dimensional scan, you feed that, and the car becomes a self-driving car. Now, again, for us, the interesting thing about the self-driving car is sharing. The amazing thing about a self-driving car is that, well, if you think about your car today, on average, in the United States, you use it 5% of the time. 95% of the time is parked somewhere, and it's not only it's a useless piece of urban infrastructure, but actually it occupies valuable space in our cities. So if you have a self-driving car, the amazing thing is that it can give you a lift in the morning, and then it can give a lift to somebody else in your family, or to anybody else in the city. So again, you can create a much more shareable system. And if you combine this, the sharing of the vehicle, with what I was saying before about the sharing of the ride, the combination of both can give you a city, such as Valencia or Barcelona or Milan or New York or Singapore, a bigger city or a smaller city, where you can take everybody to destination when they need to be there with like 20% of the vehicles we have today. And think about how different our cities would be if that were the case. Of course, all of this is based on the ability to share more the ride and share more the vehicle. Just for fun, I wanted to share with you also some information on other things that might change when everything might become self-driving a few years from now. For instance, that's a well-known traffic light. And as you might know, traffic lights ended up on our roads when cars arrived on our roads. But if you got an intelligent system where every car knows where all the other cars are, so you don't need to stop anymore at the traffic light, you can just keep on going, but avoid bumping into somebody else. A little bit like this. Don't try yet. I gave a presentation in Naples a few months ago, and they told me, so what is new here? I'm Italian, so I can say this. So I think this was a former Italian minister who said that in Milan, traffic lights are instructions. In Rome, they are suggestions. In Naples, they are Christmas decorations. All right, so again, we are working on this, and we are working mathematically on intersections and looking at different ways to manage flows. What you see here is actually a real intersection in Singapore. And to the left, you got it managed using the most sophisticated traffic light system we have today. And to the right, you got a slot-based system, similar to slots as you have them in airports. And look at the difference in terms of delays and cars waiting to the left and to the right. All right. I wanted to share with you also one example of something else that might change when you do all this happen. One of the consequences that most people think about increased self-driving is that we'll need much less space for parking. And so, for instance, that's a parking lot we are designing right now in Singapore, where from the beginning, we're doing the distance between the floors a bit higher, and then we're putting the ramps outside so that space, if we need less parking tomorrow, we could reconvert it into other activities. So it becomes like a piece of urban infrastructure that could be turned into other things over time, like this. I also want to share with you another example related to self-driving it's an experiment we did at the World Expo in Milan last year, 2015. It was there until a year and a half ago. And there we had to design the pavilion for New Holland. And, of course, if you can do a self-driving car, you can do a self-driving tractor. It's much easier to use the same technology to move in the countryside. And if you've got a self-driving tractor, then you can think about doing something like this. So having tractors actually move over space, and they put different seeds in different places. So you're basically printing at the scale of agriculture. You might say, this is cool, but why would you want to do it? Well, you want to do it because the only way we could farm in the 20th century was by monoculture. And monoculture means that you take the same thing, the same seeds, and then you plant them hectare after hectare after hectare. Or if you are in North America, square kilometer after square kilometer for huge extensions of land. But that is not what nature does. If you do that, if you do a monoculture, you're creating a very fragile ecosystem. And then you need to use a lot of chemicals and pesticides in order to protect it. But nature does something different. Nature works in a different way, puts different seeds in different places, creates a much more diverse community in general, a much more diverse way of farming. And then, then you have a much more robust ecosystem, which is, what nature has been doing forever. And so the idea is that tomorrow, if you got self-driving tractors and if you got robotics on the field, you can think about going back to something more similar to that, where you put different seeds in different places and you farm them in a very precise way, specific way, and then you harvest them in a very specific way. And so you go from monoculture to something which is much more similar to what nature has been doing forever. And I want to share with you an example that was a test that was done by Benedict Gross, who was a researcher in our lab at MIT. Again, he did this as his thesis at the Royal College of Art in London. And so he said, imagine you got two types of seeds and you want to mix them. And what would nature do? Nature most likely would do something of this sort, based on cells and similar. Now, we don't need to be too precise to know what nature would do, because tomorrow we can do studies in order to better understand exactly what's the best way to do it. But let's imagine it's something like this, with or without the smiley face over there. And then so we can try to implement this. So what I will show you now is how this picture then became actually a farm field by having a very precise triangulation system and then having an intelligent system where tractors will put different seeds in different places. So in the video you see now, you see that picture on the computer screen that little by little becomes a farmed field. See the smiley face over there? All right. I just wanted to show you one final example related also to intelligent systems in mobility. And that's an example with the city of Amsterdam. Now, the mayor of Amsterdam came to MIT a few years ago, and she was really passionate about looking at how new technologies can help develop different aspects of urban mobility, in this case. When you think about urban mobility in Amsterdam, that's a city center. It's an amazing city center where, roads are quite small, but you got a lot of water. And the water today is used for many things. It's used for moving parcels. That's a DHL boat. It's used for moving people, around. And it has been used like this, the water in the canals, for hundreds of years. So our idea was, what if, again, if you could develop an intelligent system made of self-driving boats, then you could do different things. These boats could, of course, move people around, move parcels around. They could help us to sense the city, the water quality, the air quality, keep on constantly monitoring the city. But think about also like creating a flexible infrastructure, like, you got a big event or an emergency, you can have a bridge that self-assembles, or you can have a floating stage, like a responsive piece of urban infrastructure that can follow local conditions. And of course, if you want, that's nothing new. Venice has been doing this for hundreds of years. That's all the gondolas coming together to create a temporary bridge to connect the Chiesa del Redentore with the rest. But again, I think often the most interesting technologies are the one that allow us to do the things we've always done or we always wanted to do, but these new technologies allow us to do them in a different way. It's not about developing new needs, it's about finding something we wanted to do or we tried to do before, and then we can do now in a different way. Now, the project in Amsterdam started just a few months ago. What we are designing now is this little boat that, like a quadcopter, like a drone, has 4 motors, so it can be very controllable. We're trying with motors like this, perpendicular, motor like this with little jets, 4 little jets at the 4 corners. That's the scale model, is 1:4, so the real one will be 4 times bigger. We were just testing in the canals in Amsterdam a few weeks ago. You see how controllable it is? I can rotate, can move in different directions. Also move in one direction, then reverse completely. You can also move laterally. In the worst case, we will actually do a toy company. Everybody seems to have so much fun playing with these things. And that's also something we've been working on with Paris, thinking about another floating element. In this case, like it becomes a gym, and where the energy of the people is harvested in order to move the gym. So the gym itself, people exercise, and that energy of people exercising is that used to power the gym across the Seine. And you see it here from the inside. Well, looking at, if somebody is concerned about, there's a bit of battery, so if there's a mutiny, people don't want to exercise anymore, you're still able to go back to your original position. So this was about, looking at mobility at the city scale. I want to share with you some other things about mobility and sharing, more inside the building. And that's about the MIT campus. What you see here is actually how people move on the MIT campus in the course of the day. The MIT campus is here, so you see Boston here, downtown. You see MIT is like a small city inside the city. Harvard, don't bother, up there. And MIT was one of the first places to be totally covered by Wi-Fi in the early 2000s. And so over time, we've seen people change their way of working, going from working like this and going to work like this. Now, this is a bit extreme. This is like the most appalling computer room I could find. No daylight, only artificial lighting. And this is like a beautiful sunny day. Now, I need to tell you, last week when it was still freezing, it wasn't like this. But it gives you a sense of the change. It's the same change we've seen in society. This is the old way of working. That's the Jacques Tati playtime, but there's still people around the world working in such a way. But the fact that today we're much more flexible, you can work in an environment which is much more similar to this one. It's much more pleasurable place for helping us to come together, exchange ideas, share thoughts, and so on. So what we decided to do on the MIT campus is, well, technology is changing the way we live and work. So what if you can monitor technology in order to better understand what is going on? So we went and got information from all the little access points on campus, and we started monitoring them. So that's, again, the same picture. You see people moving in the course of the day. What you see here is the aggregated activity on the MIT campus. That's Monday morning around 9 o'clock, people get to campus. These are some people leaving at 5, not that many. So these are the 9 to 5 people, but a lot of people still keep on working till late at night. They like what they do. They go ahead till 8, 9, 10 p.m. Even in the middle of the night, there's still quite a lot of activity. And the same thing happens on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, not on Friday. Like all over the world, activity like today slips away very quickly in the afternoon. And there's Saturday or Sunday at almost like 2 normal days. You remove the 9 to 5 people, but it's almost like 2 normal days, with something quite interesting, that every Sunday night, you see that there's a little dent over there that's between 9 and 10 p.m. We guess that is when everybody says, shit, tomorrow is Monday again. And then you go to finish all the things you haven't finished for the beginning of the next week. So if you look at this, you can actually look at every place on campus and look at how people use it. So that's occupancy in every room. And then you analyze it. You can do different type of clustering. That's actually analysis using Fourier transform or different type of clustering techniques. And what you find is exactly what I was mentioning before, the kind of flexibility of usage, where different users are being overlapped over the same space. Now, what we are doing now is look at this. So if you think about MIT, but any university, like this university, like any organization, is about having people coming from different parts of society, coming together, exchanging ideas in physical space, exchanging ideas in digital space, and producing something. If you are a university, what you produce is papers and patents. So what you're trying to do now is look at all the three parameters. It's not only where we are and how we communicate, but also how we exchange online and how then this results in what we are doing, in this case in papers or patents. So you can actually look at the number of patents and papers produced at MIT per building. You can look at people's presence. You can look at different community. It's usually you see the communities with more heterogeneous population become much more productive is when you got different people coming together. You get better results in terms of productivity. And then really the whole network of how people connect. So that becomes, we haven't finished this piece of work, but what we want to look at is three parameters that are crucial to society, that are crucial to every organization. It's about all of us coming together, exchanging ideas in physical space, in digital space, and accomplishing something together. So if we can measure the three things, we can then start to understand how we can, for instance, design better spaces for people to come together and share. And that's something we are developing now in some of the design projects we are doing. That's one of the largest co-working spaces in Southern Europe. We just designed a few months ago. This is another place in America where we are looking at this kind of all these public spaces, outdoor, indoor, where people can exchange, interact, and keep on working together. The climate here is quite nice, so the whole year round you can use outdoor spaces. That's another space it's called Fondazione Agnelli, and will also be the office of the chairman of Fiat Chrysler. And it's interesting that, a few years ago, if you thought about the office of the chairman of a big corporation, that probably would be like secluded, very separate, and would be, very impressive. Many corporations in the 20th century would be this kind of fascist headquarters where, the CEO would actually sit. Well, in this case, it's interesting. The whole space is inside a co-working space. So the whole offices and so on are inside a co-working space. So the idea, the key point is about sharing and exchanging ideas become the governing principle also at every level in an organization. And in this building as well, what we are trying to do is also look at how to make the building more responsive. So because occupancy, then you also have the building like heating, lighting, and cooling that can respond to you. This was just a review of the building. This is one of the first pictures taken last week. It was in the Wall Street Journal. But you can see a bit about heating, lighting, and cooling and how they actually can follow occupancy. Again, what you're doing, you're creating a building that's more responsive, and you can potentially save a lot of energy. And to quantify the amount of energy we could save, we actually did this project. So we went again on the MIT campus and looked at the dynamic relationship between building occupancy and energy consumption, which is in this curve and shows that today there is no relationship. Today we use a lot of energy to heat empty buildings or to cool empty buildings. Think about our offices during the winter. They're heated overnight when nobody's there. Think about our homes. They're heated during the day when nobody's there. So the idea is that can we think about something like, think about concentrating heating and cooling on people. We call it local warming. Instead of heating the whole space, actually have almost like a bubble of heat that follows us as we are in space. We did a first experiment outside MIT. That was, you would enter the building, that's 77 Massachusetts Avenue, and then this bubble of heat would appear and follow you through the corridor. Some people freaked out, but most people loved it. And so in this, in this second prototype, what we did it as a false ceiling. So you see this kind of false ceiling. This was at the Venice Biennale. And this false ceiling is getting this bubble of heat that actually move around underneath and follow people and occupancy there. So again, the topic is about how we can create an architecture that responds better to people. And in this case, by responding better to people, you can also save a lot of energy because you don't need to do what we used to do in the 20th century, which is keep the same temperature everywhere, but actually we can be much more precise in the way we control the building. The final thing I want to share with you is this project, and I want to keep 10-15 minutes for Q&A and the interaction with you. But it's this project where we looked at another type of mobility. So we looked at mobility at the city scale, we looked at mobility on the MIT campus inside the building, but also other type of mobility. In this case, we started by looking at that computer. And today you know everything about that computer. You know every chip in that computer, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became that machine. And you can actually go to sites such as source map that will tell you, all the elements of a certain product, where they're coming from and how they are assembled. However, what happens is that a few years from now, you stop using that machine, you will sell it. At some point, somebody will throw it away, and then you know very little about it. Today, we know where objects come from. We don't know where they go. Sometimes this is where they go. A lot of objects, electronic objects, shipped illegally from Europe to Africa, from the United States to Asia. So our idea was, what if you could add a little tag, a little chip on trash, and follow trash? We couldn't find anything off the shelf, so we had to design this. It's almost like a miniature cell phone that performs only one task, which is get location and report location back into the cloud. Now, so we designed these. We did a first deployment in Seattle. We had 500 volunteers, came with 3,000 pieces of trash. We put a little tag on all of them. And after tagging all of them, we started following them. So here you can see 3,000 objects. After a few days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But then a big surprise, how far stuff started to travel. Sometimes in a crazy way. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago, changed his mind, and went back to California. And still moving after 1 month or 2 months. The Farewell Symphony. So what can you do with this? The first thing you can do, you learn much more about waste, in this case about what you could call the removal chain, not the supply chain, but what happens to things when we throw them away. And then you can use this information in order to optimize the system. Again, there's so much energy we could save by looking at those traces and trying to streamline the whole waste management system. The second thing that's very important, this is about big data. It's about big data we can collect, in this case about trash. But big data per se, if you share it with people, can have a very powerful impact in terms of behavioral change. Big data means we know much more about us, about the environment, about the consequences of what we do. And so just by knowing more, we can then decide to change our behavior. And if you're interested, there's a few papers, scientific papers we did. They are on our website that look at that. We went back to the volunteers, the 500 volunteers, and asked them about how this might have changed your behavior. And we analyzed that, so if you're interested, there's that information online. But I'll tell you just an anecdote of somebody who came to us at the end and said, look, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day, and then throw away the bottles and forget about them. I wouldn't stop thinking about them. But now, after the project, I know that those bottles go to a landfill just a few miles from home. They will stay in the landfill forever. And so because of this, I stopped drinking water in plastic bottles. So this idea that really big data, if shared with people, if shared between all of us, then it can help us to decide how to behave in a different way, hopefully in a better way. The third thing we discover is that a lot of things were ending up in ports and then disappearing. What we were doing, as I said, every tag is like a miniature cell phone. And the cell phone, every tag has a SIM card. But just for the sake of budget, we just kept the SIM card as a US SIM card. We didn't have a global roaming plan. And so we lost track of many of those things. So what we've been doing over the past couple of years is do an experiment, which is probably the largest ever e-waste tracking experiment ever done, where we discovered places such as this one in the middle of the jungle in Asia by mapping all of the e-waste from the United States as it moves across the planet. We did this with BAN, Basel Action Network, a non-profit that actually looks at waste and how we manage waste. If you go on our website, you'll see this. You can click on each of the traces. Those are all electronic objects shipped from the United States to other parts of the world. Some of the traces are legal, some of the traces are not. But then, again, the idea that big data means we know much more also at the planetary level about the system. And then hopefully, again, we can make things better, take action, use data in order to take action and transform the system. Well, and the final thing I want to share with you is something we discovered that was totally unexpected. And that happened when a burglar came to our offices in Boston. And this poor guy stole a lot of things, including tags and computers that tell you where they go. And so this is what happened. Oh. All right. Thank you. All right. And I kept, just 10. I think we have 10 minutes left before the end of the session, and it would be great to really engage in more discussion with you. So any questions or ideas, challenges you might have, just raise your hands, and we'll look at that. Yes. Why don't you, I think there might be some microphones coming, but why don't you speak up a little bit, and then I will repeat your question so that everybody else will hear it.
Yeah, my question is basically, it's an ongoing debate about technology and privacy. So,
yeah.
Relating to this about the burglary, could it be also a tool, this data mining, also a tool for debating privacy, or how do you guys look at that in that sense, and is there any regulation that could also...
Yeah. Thanks all for asking that. And summarize for everybody else, but it's about all the data and privacy. And I think you're right. It's really a very important issue today. To be honest, it's not that much an issue at the city level, but it's an issue more in our private lives. If you think about each of us with a smartphone, I guess most of the people in this room, if you got a smartphone, then you might know that your location, your activity, what you've been browsing, and so on, all of that information since you woke up this morning is probably a few thousands of data points. All that information is somewhere in the cloud. It might be in Cupertino, it might be in, in Mountain View, it might be in other places, but all this information today is collected. And that's creating a very new situation for humanity, both from the point of view of recording everything, but also from the point of view of access. Who has access to the data? There's a lot of asymmetry today. Some big companies in big states have a lot of access to things. They know a lot about us, but we know much less about them. So the solution for this is not going to be a technological solution. The solution for this is going to be a political solution. It is about what type of society we want to build. And I think that's a question we should all be very aware of and we should all debate. On our side at MIT, we organized already twice a forum we called Engaging Data, where we invited, and you find some of the videos from the past forums, where we had the Obama administration, we had privacy advocates, we had big companies, we had academics, and many others really talking about some of these issues. I don't think we should discuss today, what is the solution. I don't think there's one solution, but I think it's very important we have a debate so we can decide which solution we want to embrace together. Because the society we will build tomorrow will depend on the choices we make today in this space. So thanks a lot for asking that. It's a very, very important point. Any other comments or questions? There's a microphone as well now. Challenges, yes. First.
Hi, thank you so much for an impressive presentation. I would like to ask you just a question about what do you think about the difference between, we are talking a lot about the smart cities, but very few about the smart citizens. What do you think between those two concepts of, there is a smart city, but if we don't have a smart citizen, we are doing bullshit. Sorry for the...
No, I agree. Actually, first of all, I hate the term smart city. People use it a lot today, but I try never to use it. We call our lab Senseable City. And the reason is that smart city really puts the emphasis on smart technologies. And so it's almost like it feels a little bit like a computer for living in, a city like a computer in open air. So I think, that's why I don't like it much. I think Senseable, the name of our lab, for us was important because it's about a city that's able to sense, that's sensible and sensible. It's a play on words, but a city where really citizens are at the center. And I agree with you, a smart city without smart citizens doesn't make any sense. And also it's very important to talk about this in Europe, I would say, because in Europe I see that sometimes people think that a smart city is something that the government should do, either the national government or the EU or the local government. I think nothing is more wrong. I think a smart city is really about empowering citizens to take action. It's really allowing people, a lot of the great graduates coming out of this university to think about how to do startups in the space of urban innovation. I think it's really much more bottom-up than top-down. So I think one of the mistakes today in Europe is that it's thought as a top-down initiative. We should really think about this as like a bottom-up way to empower people and to let all of us, play in the space of urban innovation. Yes.
I would like to ask, I can see from your presentation, at some point we could assume that, in fact, technology seems to be like a solution or a bridge to bring the solution.
Yeah.
But in fact, some of the examples you gave, for example, how we're going to deal with the garbage or how we increase the efficiency of buildings. In fact, we could do it already. I mean, like I studied here, Polytechnic University of Valencia, and we had a great example of not energetic efficiency. And in fact, we have the main experts of Valencia here, the university could be. So I'm afraid of that approach of technology bringing the solution. Because in fact, we can see we have all of us, we have smartphones, and it's not making us smarter people. So I don't know, maybe it's more a
It's a very interesting question. I'll try to summarize about, we saw the example of technology, but is technology really providing a solution? And I agree with you. Technology is never provided a solution. And actually, sometimes technology also allows you to go in two different directions. Think about what I was saying about mobility. So I said potentially with self-driving cars, we can share much more. And we could potentially run a city such as Valencia or New York with 20% of the cars we have today. Well, that's an interesting outcome. But you also have an opposite outcome that might come out of technology as well, which is the following. That if you think about the United States today, a car, think about an Uber, a Lyft, a car that you rent, usually has a cost of around $2.2 per mile. Now, according to most studies, if we go to self-driving and the technology is there and it is ready, then that cost could go down to anything between 20 cents and 50 cents or 60 cents per mile. If that happens, then in New York or in any big city, nobody would want to take mass transportation anymore. Everybody would just, because that's going to be much cheaper. In most places, also in Europe, the cost of public transportation is around €1. So you could do basically up to 4 or 5 miles, think about 7, 8 kilometers for that price with a car coming to pick you up and taking you to your destination. So most people would say, well, it's cheaper, it's much better service, I'm going to do that. But then if we want to do that, then our cities are going to be gridlock. Because if you kill mass transportation, then there's no way the streets of New York and most other cities have enough capacity for all of us actually moving in a more independent way. So again, that's one example of how self-driving can actually lead to a society where we share more, we have less cars on the road, we reclaim a lot of parking spaces, we reclaim a lot of, we turn parking spaces on our streets, in our city centers into public spaces, or a totally opposite scenario where the same technology can actually create hell. So again, it can be utopia or dystopia with the same technology. And I agree with you. So basically, the important thing is that there's always a discussion in society about technology. And that's why the work we do is, what we try to do is actually use technology to try out new things that maybe haven't been tried yet or been discussed but not implemented. So that's what we see as our role both at the university but also in our design office. So try to push the boundary and make that also public. And I think the discussion we're having right now is very important because, by doing that, then you can see what are the things that we can actually want to embrace. Sometimes you even want to show technologies that are really dangerous from the beginning because it's a way to create antibodies in society. So I think, the only thing we can deal with that is I agree with you that technology is not a solution. Actually, there's a very nice sentence by Cedric Price, who was one of the great radical architects from the 1960s and 70s. And he said basically, technology is the answer, but what is the problem? And I think today we're in the same condition, and the problem we need to define it as society. The problem is always a problem we need to define together. So what we can do is architects, designers, to look at the potential of technology to transform the space we live in, and then start a debate so that the future we build is actually determined not by technology, but by our discussion. Yes?
Pardon.
A lot of the examples you gave are cities in the developed world.
Yeah.
A little bit more sustainable, a little bit more...
Actually, there's a microphone. Maybe it's, yeah.
So a lot of the examples you gave today is for developing cities, for developed cities, so cities in the first world, to make them a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more mobile, etc. How is your technology also applicable for developing countries, where the impact is much bigger, I guess?
It's a great question, and there's two answers here. The first answer, the easy answer, is that yes, I showed you a lot of projects in the developed world and less projects in emerging countries, but actually we have a few pilots going on with Cape Town, with Rio de Janeiro, with Jakarta, so we're also working in that space. But at the same time, we should not make a mistake. And the mistake is the following. If you look at this, when you look at this, any phone, any cell phone, when they became widespread in the early 90s, during the 90s, well, at the beginning, they actually were just a tool to increase the divide. Only few people could afford it. Cell phones were very expensive, and they were basically a tool that would increase the divide in society. But then you fast forward to today. Today, we got more cell phones and smartphones on the planet than people. We got parts of the planet where people have a smartphone and don't have running water. And smartphone has become a beautiful example of how actually to leapfrog. Entire parts of Africa, as you might know, have much more sophisticated online banking services or mobile banking services than Europe or the United States, just because they started using this in a new way. There's beautiful examples. I was in Sri Lanka a few years ago, and I was really going through the coast, and we did a few projects there. And there's beautiful stories there of how actually fishermen started using this to get in real time the price of fish, and not being ripped off anymore by the merchants as they were before. So what I'm saying here is that the technology has always to start somewhere. And the technology at the beginning would be more expensive at the very beginning, and it might be something that increases the divide, it increases the gap. But that's not a reason not to do it. And because if we do it right, like the case of cell phones shows, but there's many others, then if we do it right, the same technology then later can help us to close the gap, can help us turn many communities in emerging countries help many communities in emerging countries to leapfrog and actually so decrease the divide. So I think that's the kind of more philosophical answer, is that yes, every technology has to start somewhere, but still you want to do it and still think down the line how this can reduce the gap later. I think I think it shows we are almost over with time, but I think there's probably one more question or comment. Yes.
Automation and robotics not always create new jobs. Sometimes.
Okay, get the microphone. I think it's. If not, I repeat it, but I think it's better to hear it from you.
The extreme automation and robotics don't always create new jobs. Sometimes they erase jobs. What do you think about it? And also extreme sophistication in technologies give people not to be aware of what's behind the technology. This is another question to me.
Yeah, I think those two are very important questions. Actually, those are not new questions. And some of the nicest books that looks at these questions is a book by a great writer and researcher from the past century called Lewis Mumford. Lewis Mumford wrote a lot of great books about the city. One is called The City in History, but also about technology. And one of the books from the 1930s is called Techniques and Civilization. And he looks exactly at those 2 points in the book. The first one is, yes, technology usually kills jobs. There's a prediction, there's a study by the University of Oxford that basically states, gets to the conclusion that over the next 20 years, 40% of the jobs we know today might actually disappear, might vanish. That's huge. If you think about self-driving car, which is already a reality today, that's going to kill the jobs of tens of millions of people today making a living driving all across the planet. Not only taxi drivers, but all the people driving for a living that will lose their job for driving cars or trucks or other things. So those are huge changes. Now, what Mumford said in the 1930s, which I think is still true today, is that what usually happens is that the jobs you're going to get rid of are the jobs that are more boring. The jobs where you have, where you have a lot of repetition. The machine can do the stuff where you can easily automate. And then what remains for us is actually the stuff that has higher added value. So the stuff that really can enrich more our lives. So overall, it could actually be a good transition. We move from jobs that are very repetitive. Think about the poor people in the 20th century who spend their lives turning a bolt on a production line. Well, I don't think, what was that a living? I don't know. But then, so if a robot does it, it's very good. But there's two very important things to look at, and the two things are transition and redistribution. Transition means that what happens in the middle if you got people who studied or who learned something, and they've done something for a number of years, and then immediately from one day to the next they lose their job. So how do we manage the transition in society? And the second thing is even more important, is about redistribution. So how can we make sure that the benefits of this new world that hopefully is going to be better if we get rid of some of the boring and more repetitive tasks, how can we make sure that those benefits actually are shared with everybody? And as you might know, one of the ideas has been floating around as being taxing robots. I think it is actually a very good idea, taxing artificial intelligence, putting taxes on robots and artificial intelligence. There was a vote at the European Parliament 3 weeks ago that actually decided against this. Surprisingly enough, somebody like Bill Gates came out as one of the supporters of the idea of putting taxes on robots. And I think that's a very good way to say, well, yes, we can put more robots in society, we can use more artificial intelligence, but can we take a tax? And maybe that tax is what is going to allow everybody else to have a universal base salary or any way to redistribute some of the wealth, not only to those who provided the capital, but to those who might have lost their jobs. So those are two very important things. The second part of your question was also very interesting, was about, yes, technology sometimes is we delegate something to machines, and then we're not able anymore to do those things. And so, we're losing the ability to do it. And again, this is something that Louis Mumford mentioned already in the 30s. And his solution was more, yes, we can delegate to machines, but we can keep on doing things as amateur. And think about what's happening, for instance, today, we are not farmers anymore. 200 years ago here, or in Italy, in most of Europe, most of us, like 90%, over 90% of us would be farming. Now we've delegated that. We use tractors, and we got just a small percentage of the population farming, and everybody else is not doing it anymore. But at the same time, you see more and more people wanting to do urban agriculture. In New York, you got more and more people having bees or doing farm agriculture, not because that's going to satisfy all of the demand for food of the city, but because that's a way to keep on doing those things and keep on learning those things and not really being able still to keep those skills alive and enjoy those skills. So somehow, I think one of the possible solutions for the second part of your question is, yes, we delegate to machines a lot of the boring things. We can keep on doing some of the other things more for leisure as amateurs, and that's a way to enjoy it first, but also to make sure that those skills are not lost. I think I see that the time is over and see the chairs here, but thank you very much. It was great being with you here today.
Thank you very much.